Faith does not offer a strong link between our beliefs and actual states of the world. And this is not an accident, because it is what we rely on when no such links exist. It is what we rely on when the reasons are not there, when the sensory evidence is not there. As moral documents, these are diabolical books. These texts tell us to kill people for all manner of infraction. You kill your children for talking back to you. You kill people who work on the Sabbath. You kill people who have homosexual sex, men at any rate. You kill people for adultery. You kill people for wizardry. The list is long and preposterous. Now, the problem I want to talk about tonight is the problem of belief. What does it mean to believe? We use this word all the time, and I think behind it lurk some really extraordinary taboos and confusions. What I want to argue tonight is that how we talk about belief, how we fail to criticize or criticize the beliefs of others, has more importance to us personally, more consequence to us personally, and to civilization than perhaps anything else that is in our power to influence. So what is belief? Well, beliefs are representations of the world, clearly. They're mental representations of the world, but they're not only that. A belief is a representation of the world which is taken to actually represent the world, which is to say, it's taken to be true. This is what separates beliefs from suspicions or hopes. This is why beliefs can really guide our behavior. You know, we all believe that we were meeting here for a talk at 7:30 tonight. Anyone who thought the talk was going to start at 8 will be wandering through the door in a few minutes. Beliefs organize our behavior. Just imagine the change in you, neurologically, that would occur if you came to believe suddenly that this building was about to collapse. You know, mere words, someone would just come into the door and say, "Run for your lives." And if he looked like a plausible version of a fire marshal, you would have a very different state of being, emotionally, behaviorally. So that the fact that you're content to even stay seated here at the moment rests very much on what you believe to be true about your circumstance. Now, I want to talk in particular about religious beliefs, and this is where we may run into some difficulty, because I'm going to say some very nasty things about religious belief, and some of you may get offended. I know you're a very reformed, moderate bunch, but some of you undoubtedly will get offended. I want you to notice this process, the dynamics of it. You know, if I say something and the walls start to go up in you, I want you to remember just what it was. Presumably I haven't said anything offensive yet, and we're still having a conversation, but as you'll see, I think conversation really is the issue. And what prevents it, what derails it, is really the challenge for us to specify as a species, really. Now, there's a taboo here that has already begun casting its shadow over our conversation, and I want to make it explicit before violating it. It is taboo in our society to criticize a person's religious faith. I know fundamentalists complain a lot about having their beliefs criticized. Not the way I'm about to criticize them. It's taboo even to notice the differences among our religions. It's taboo, for instance, to even notice that certain religions lead to violence in a way that others don't. Certain religious doctrines promulgate violence. Now, what I argue in my book is that these taboos are offensive, deeply unreasonable, but worse than that, they're getting people killed. And this is really my concern. My concern is that our religions, the diversity of our religious doctrines, is going to get us killed. I'm worried that our religious discourse, our religious beliefs are ultimately incompatible with civilization. It seems to me to be absolutely obvious that there is no future in which nuclear-armed fundamentalist regimes will live side by side with one another and manage to keep the missiles happily in their silos indefinitely. People really believe that certain books were written by the creator of the universe. Given the contents of these books, people really believe that death in the right circumstances is the highest good. People really believe that such a death can't come soon enough for themselves and even for their children. People are really motivated by these beliefs. So I wrote The End of Faith because I believe that the concessions we have all made, you have all made, religious moderates especially have made, to faith in our discourse. These concessions have rendered us powerless to really resist the encroach of fundamentalism, and therefore religious extremism and religious violence. These concessions, I think, prevent us from ultimately protecting civilization from its genuine enemies. Now, before I start careening into blasphemy, I want to put something to the fore because you're going to lose sight of it, I guarantee you. I take ethics and spirituality very seriously. I think ethics and spirituality are the only game in town, ultimately. They lie at the core of what is most beautiful and profound and necessary in our circumstance as human beings. But what I'm asking you to entertain is that there is nothing we need to believe on insufficient evidence in order to have deeply ethical and spiritual lives. There's nothing that we need to believe on insufficient evidence to invoke the power of ritual, to build beautiful sanctuaries, to come together as communities. Now, we're all familiar with this notion that you should respect another person's religious beliefs. Your neighbor has the right to believe whatever he wants to about God or the moral structure to this universe or what happens after death, and you should respect these beliefs merely because he believes them. Does this sound strange to anybody? Where else do we play by these rules? When was the last time any of us was admonished to respect someone's beliefs about history or biology or geography? You know, if someone comes into this room and claims to believe with all his heart, down to his toes, that Tennessee is on the west coast of the United States, you are under no obligation at all to respect him for it. And you're certainly under no obligation to give him a job as a fighter pilot or an airline pilot.
Beliefs are not private decorations in someone's mind. Beliefs shape behavior. If someone believes a building is about to collapse, they run. If someone believes a holy book contains the direct commands of God, that belief can shape politics, family life, law, violence, and morality. That is why religious belief deserves the same criticism as any claim about history, science, or medicine. Christianity itself shows the problem. The Bible includes passages commanding violence, such as Deuteronomy 13, where people are told to kill those who lead others to different gods. When beliefs are protected from criticism simply because they are religious, dangerous ideas become harder to challenge.
Now, what we do in every other area of our lives is, rather than respect somebody's beliefs, we evaluate their reasons. If a person's reasons behind his beliefs are good enough and he can articulate them, you will helplessly believe what he believes. That's what it is to be a rational human being. Beliefs are contagious if they're backed up by reasons, except on matters of faith. So what is faith then? Now, clearly we use this term in a variety of ways, in at least two ways, and there's only one sense of this term that I'm criticizing. And there's a very ordinary use of faith. We talk, for instance, of having faith in yourself. You know, all of us have to live our lives in the context of uncertainty, and this kind of faith is just a positive orientation toward life. You know, if anyone needs a written guarantee before they get out of bed in the morning that the day is going to go well, they're going to have profound difficulties living their lives. So we need to be able to work and live in the context of uncertainty, and in the context of very troubling certainties, like the certainty of death. So there's nothing wrong with this kind of faith. But this is not the faith that has given us religion. The faith of religion is belief on insufficient evidence. Religious faith is the presumption of knowledge that certain facts are true, that certain books, for instance, were written by God or otherwise inspired by God, that certain historical figures were divine or something more than human. And we rely on faith only in the context of claims for which there is no sufficient sensory or logical evidence. Otherwise, you would never think to invoke faith. If you are standing on the mountaintop and the voice of God is booming at you from the whirlwind, when you come down from the mountain and somebody asks you, why do you believe in God, you are not going to invoke faith. You're going to say, I was there. God spoke to me. I heard him. There is no satisfactory explanation for my experience apart from a supernatural visitation. And that's what I'm calling God. If your child gets cancer and the doctors say there's nothing that can be done for her, and you convene your church or your synagogue and the congregation prays over her and she gets better, I can guarantee you that for the rest of your life, if someone asks you, why do you believe in God, that is going to be the first thing that comes to mind. The doctor said she was going to die. We prayed over her. She was healed. Okay, that is not faith. That is a reason. That is an evidentiary frame of mind. That is practically science. It's not good science. It's not a double-blind study. It should be obvious to all of you that there is room for wishful thinking and sheer coincidence to intrude there. But where we have reasons, where we can have just even a semblance of a reason, we seize upon them. So one of the things I argue in my book is that no one is content, really, to rely on faith. Faith simply greases the wheels of cognition in the meantime, allowing us to take on board representations of the world that are presumed to actually represent the world. They're presumed to be true. It's presumed that Jesus really was the Son of God, or that a cracker literally becomes Jesus if you say the right Latin words over it, or that there is a God who can respond to prayer. And we presume these propositions to be true in the absence of sufficient evidence. Now, undoubtedly, there are people in this room who are going to want to say that faith is something else entirely. It's an inner knowing, it's a movement of the heart, it is some other kind of esoteric experience. What I'm arguing is that that is not what billions of people on this earth mean by faith. Now, the faith of billions, these incompatible claims about the divine origin of certain books, this faith has divided our world, has balkanized our world into separate moral communities: Christians, Muslims, Jews, Hindus. This is a problem. These are divisions in the human community over which conflict is inevitably happening. Either you believe Jesus was the Son of God or you don't. If you do, if you believe that there's no path to the Father but through the Son, it is impossible, logically impossible, emotionally impossible, for you to really respect the beliefs of Muslims and Jews. Those beliefs lead to damnation. When the stakes are this high, when calling God by the right name can make the difference between eternal happiness and eternal suffering, it is impossible to respect the beliefs of others who don't believe as you do. So this is why the heretic is actually far more dangerous than the child molester. I mean, the heretic next door, if he articulates his heresy, stands a chance of damning the souls of your children for all time. If you really believe this stuff, if you really believe that a certain book was written by God, it becomes quite reasonable to treat heretics very badly. What do we do to child molesters? We lock them up. What did we do to heretics for centuries? We burned them alive. This was reasonable, given what we believed. The patriarchs of the Western tradition, the great men still taught to all college freshmen, St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Augustine. In Aquinas' case, he thought heretics should be killed. Augustine thought they should be tortured. Augustine's argument for the torture of heretics inspired the Inquisition. Now you may say, we don't torture heretics anymore. But we have secularism to thank for that. We have centuries of secular dialogue, secular politics, and scientific insight. We now know that when the crops fail, it wasn't because a jealous neighbor cast a spell. We know that epileptics are not possessed by demons. We know this by virtue of science.
Faith gets treated like a virtue, but in religion it often means believing without enough evidence and then demanding respect for that belief anyway. Christianity makes huge claims that one man is God, that one book speaks for the creator of the universe, and that everyone outside that belief system is spiritually lost. That is not a small private opinion. That is a worldview that divides people into saved and condemned. John 14:6 says, "No one comes to the Father except through Jesus." So let's be honest. Christianity does not simply ask for love and peace. It claims exclusive ownership of truth, salvation, and morality. Once a belief system says doubt is dangerous and outsiders are wrong before the conversation even starts, reason has already been pushed out of the room. That is the problem with faith. It protects weak claims from hard questions.
So centuries of secular conversation have essentially edited our faith, and even the faith of fundamentalists in the West. But the same is not true at the moment in the Muslim world. Specifically, the crime of apostasy, the disavowal of your religion, this is still punishable by death everywhere under Islam. Now, how often that sanction is carried out changes from country to country, but the fundamental problem here is that it is a normative conception under Islam that the disavowal of the Quran, the disavowal of your religion as a Muslim, is punishable by death. You never hear moderate Muslims saying it isn't. Not even Cat Stevens, an ex-hippie rock star, can tell you that it isn't. This is why scarcely a sensible sound in defense of Salman Rushdie emerged from the Muslim world in the aftermath of Khomeini's fatwa. So let's get our bearings here domestically. What do our neighbors believe? What do many people in this room very likely believe? Well, 22% of Americans claim to be certain that Jesus is going to return to earth sometime in the next 50 years. Another 22% believe he probably will do so. This is 44% of the electorate. This is 150 million people in our country. 150 million people believe that a historical figure, who incidentally was crucified 2,000 years ago, is going to come out of the sky like a superhero and wield his magic powers over the face of the earth, kill all the bad people, and save the day sometime in the next 50 years. Now, this belief, of course, entails other beliefs. It's no accident that 44% of Americans also believe that we were created from dust sometime in the last 10,000 years with no genetic precursors. 44% of Americans want us to stop teaching our children about the biological fact of evolution. 62% actually want us to teach creationism in schools, but 44% want only creationism. "44% of Americans also believe that the creator of the universe literally gave the land of Israel to the Jews." This is God as an omniscient real estate broker. So, one thing I argue in my book is that we are building a civilization of ignorance. And it's not just that we're in danger of losing our technological edge to China, or that medical research may be impeded, although those things undoubtedly are happening. Beliefs of this sort have geopolitical consequences. 44% of Americans, if they turned on their television tomorrow morning and saw that a mushroom cloud had replaced Jerusalem or New York, would see a silver lining in that cloud, because that cloud would be a portent that the best thing that is ever going to happen is about to happen: the return of Christ. And this is not, these people not only elect our congressmen and our presidents, they get elected as our congressmen and presidents. We are not talking about the fringes of society. We are quite literally talking about the fringes of the Oval Office, if not its present occupant. So, one thing I argue is that this should be terrifying to us. The idea that there's only 50 years left, the idea that there may only be 50 years left, this is perfectly maladaptive. Bad ideas don't get much worse than this. This is perfectly hostile to creating a sustainable future for ourselves, environmentally, even economically. Some of you probably remember the story about James Watt, Reagan's first Secretary of the Interior, who said in testimony before Congress, "When the last tree is felled, Christ will return." As the Secretary of the Interior. Now, most secularists didn't know what to make of this comment, but the devout certainly did. Reagan is reported to have brought Jerry Falwell into his National Security Council briefings. He had Hal Lindsey, a religious lunatic of the highest order, lecture to the Pentagon about the implications of Bible prophecy for nuclear war with the Soviet Union. So what is the problem with taking things on faith? Well, there are two, and the first should be very obvious. If faith is what you have to go on, if faith is the link between your beliefs and the world at large, your beliefs are very likely to be wrong. Beliefs can be right or wrong. If you believe you can fly, that belief is only true if indeed you can fly. Somebody who thinks he can fly and is wrong about it will eventually discover there's a problem with his view of the world.
Here is where religion becomes dangerous. It trains people to expect the end of the world instead of taking responsibility for the world we actually live in. A Pew survey found that 41% of Americans believed Jesus would definitely or probably return by 2050. Gallup also found that 37% of Americans still say God created humans in their present form within the last 10,000 years. That means millions of people are rejecting basic science while waiting for a supernatural ending. And the Bible feeds that mindset. 2 Peter says, "The heavens will disappear and the earth will be burned up." That is not a serious plan for the future. That is ancient apocalypse thinking dressed up as truth.
Faith does not offer a strong link between our beliefs and actual states of the world. And this is not an accident, because it is what we rely on when no such links exist. It is what we rely on when the reasons are not there, when the sensory evidence is not there. But there's another problem with faith, and it occurs between people and between societies. You see, we have a choice. We have two options as human beings. We have a choice between conversation and war. That's it. Conversation and violence. And faith is a conversation stopper. The only thing that guarantees an open-ended collaboration among human beings, the only thing that guarantees that this project is truly open-ended, is a willingness to have our beliefs and behaviors modified by the power of conversation. It should be clear. What else could do it? What else could guarantee that our future together of collaboration is actually open-ended? We have a consensual space where we continually revise our description of the world. New data comes in, new arguments come in. Now, failing that, when the stakes are high, we just start clubbing each other over the heads. If there's nothing that a devout Muslim and a devout Christian can say to one another that will put their beliefs about the world in check, that will make them mutually susceptible to the power of conversation, then when the stakes are high, there is nothing to appeal to but force. So now, what is it that most people take on faith? There really is this central claim that certain books are unique. Generally, the claim is certain books were written or dictated by God. Among moderates, it may be certain books may have been dictated by God. More moderate still, certain books were written by the wisest people who ever lived, and we can't improve on them. Whatever the claim, it leads certain books to be uniquely venerated. Now the question is, do the contents of these books warrant this? No. Consider the Bible as a source of moral instruction. The Bible is undoubtedly a great work of literature, but consider it as a moral document. Consider books like Leviticus and Deuteronomy and Exodus and 2 Samuel. As moral documents, these are diabolical books. These texts tell us to kill people for all manner of infraction. To kill your children for talking back to you. You kill people who work on the Sabbath. You kill people who have homosexual sex, men at any rate. You kill people for adultery. You kill people for wizardry. The list is long and preposterous. Now, most Christians and Jews imagine that somehow these admonishments were appropriate to the time, that the Canaanites were so ill-behaved that a prescription like kill your children if they talk back to you was an improvement over the status quo. This is ludicrous. This is historically ludicrous. At the exact same moment in history, people like Mahavira, the founder of Jainism, an Indian religion, and Buddha, incidentally, they were preaching highly moral doctrines, too moral. Mahavira, Jainism is a doctrine of utter nonviolence. His contemporary in the Old Testament, Elijah, was running around killing the prophets of Baal for their wayward beliefs. These are different moral visions. It was possible back then to realize you shouldn't kill your children for talking back to you. Now here I violated another taboo, or that second taboo I mentioned earlier. It is taboo to notice that our religions are actually different. Our religions are not all equally wise. They're not teaching exactly the same thing on every point, and where they do teach the same thing, they don't teach it equally well. Now, let's linger on this supposed link between Scripture and morality, because it's often claimed that unless we think one of our books was actually written by the creator of the universe, we will just be at sea morally. We will be practicing cannibalism and having sex with our children. There is no evidence for this. Let's consider a moral question that is solved, at least in the civilized world. Consider slavery. We can all agree that slavery was an abomination. Thomas Jefferson, as good as that man was, he would have been a better person if he had freed his slaves. Absolutely. Anyone who thinks that slavery, in moral terms, still may have something going for it, has been completely marginalized in our society. Well, what sort of instruction do we get from the Bible on the subject of slavery? The creator of the universe clearly expects us to keep slaves. This is true in the Old Testament. This is true in the New Testament. Jesus clearly expects us to keep slaves. Many Christians imagine that Jesus has repudiated or somehow rescinded all of Old Testament law. This is untrue. I can assure you that the ecclesiastics who were burning heretics for centuries in Europe had read all of the New Testament. They found some rationale for their actions. But on the subject of slavery, 1 Timothy 6, New Testament, admonishes slaves to serve their masters well. Serve your believing masters all the better, and thereby partake in their virtue.
Here is the part Christians do not like to face. The Bible is not a perfect moral guide. It contains commands that modern people already know are wrong. Exodus 21 gives rules for owning slaves. Leviticus 20 calls for death over sexual behavior. Deuteronomy 21 allows parents to bring a rebellious son forward so he can be stoned. And in the New Testament, 1 Timothy 6 tells slaves to honor their masters. So when Christians say morality comes from the Bible, they are already editing the Bible with modern human morality. They reject slavery, reject stoning children, reject killing people over religious law, and then pretend the book gave them that progress. It did not. Human reason, secular law, and moral argument pulled society forward while religion had to be dragged along behind it.
So if we think this book was written by the creator of the universe, or if we think this book is somehow, even if written by men, unsurpassed and unsurpassable in moral terms, we should own other human beings and make them work for us. The only restraint that God urges upon us on this subject is not to beat them so badly that we knock out their eyes or their teeth. But we can surely beat them. They're slaves, after all. We can beat it. We should beat our children, incidentally. Proverbs 23 says, "Do not withhold correction from the child. If you beat him with a rod, he will not die. If you beat him with a rod, you will save his soul from hell." Now, I think it should go without saying that any person in 21st century America who's beating his kids with a rod is a bad parent. But if you believe this is the best book on the planet in moral terms, that's the only kind of parent you should be. So there's a basic problem here. If we hold these books aside from the rest of the human conversation, make them immune to criticism, if they are uniquely wise, then we are at the mercy of their contents. And the problem is exquisitely acute in the Muslim world now, because there really are doctrines in mainstream Islam that are incompatible with civil society, specifically the doctrines of martyrdom and jihad. I mean, these are deal breakers. There is no possible future in which aspiring martyrs are going to make good neighbors for us. Now, if you think, and being moderates, you're very likely to think this, if you think that Muslim violence is really just a matter of politics, if you think it's the product of the history of oppression and the lack of economic opportunity, you should ask yourselves why we don't see Tibetan Buddhist suicide bombers. The Tibetans have suffered an occupation every bit as brutal and far more cynical than any occupation that has been visited upon the Muslim world. Many people believe that 1.2, 1.3 million Tibetans have died as a result of the Chinese occupation. We don't see throngs of Tibetans calling for the deaths of Chinese non-combatants. We don't see Tibetan Buddhist suicide bombers blowing up Chinese children in their schools. What we do see are Tibetan monks and nuns who have spent decades in Chinese prisons being tortured, who come out and say things like, "My greatest fear while in prison was that the pain of torture would cause me to lose the strength of my compassion, and I would start to hate my torturers." Now, find me a Muslim who, after decades of being tortured with an electric cattle prod in an Israeli jail, comes out speaking that way. And I will eat my book. I'm serious. It is unthinkable, given what Muslims believe. Now, let me be very clear about this. I am not talking about an ethnicity. I'm not talking about Arabs. I'm talking about the logical entailments of the doctrine of Islam. I'm talking about John Walker Lind, the white guy from Marin who went to fight with the Taliban. Now, we may question the wisdom and the desirability of the Buddhist response, this emphasis on compassion. Now, I'm absolutely open to argument on this subject. And if you read my book, you'll discover I'm not a pacifist. But what I'm not open to argument on is this taboo that prevents us from noticing the difference between a doctrine of compassion and a doctrine of jihad. The truth is, in the Muslim world, we even see people who haven't suffered much of anything willing to spend their lives trying to figure out how to kill as many non-combatants as possible. Osama bin Laden is really the reductio ad absurdum of any argument that suggests that you need to be insane or poor or the victim of oppression to take up jihad. So this is an extraordinary circumstance we're in. We have certain religious beliefs leading to the most nihilistic violence. But what could be more nihilistic than blowing yourself up in a crowd of children and having your mother approve of it? This is the situation we're in. Now, I really want to nail this down because many of you are very likely still to believe, no, Islam is a religion of peace. These are economic and political issues. This is a result of the misadventures of American foreign policy. America has a tremendous amount to apologize for in the world. There is no doubt. But this is a separate issue. Yes, they're related, but this is a separate issue. There is no possibility that we will ever have a problem with Jain suicide bombers. Insofar as a Jain becomes more and more religious, even more and more deranged by his religious dogmas, he will become less and less violent. The doctrine of Jainism is a doctrine of total pacifism. Jains drink every sip of water, observant Jains drink every sip of water through cheesecloth so that they won't swallow a bug. They sweep the path upon which they walk so that they won't step on ants. They can scarcely figure out how to live in this world. They're so nonviolent. So if you don't think religion is the difference that makes a difference, you have to explain the Jains.
The Bible does not simply mention slavery. Exodus 21 gives rules for beating slaves, saying the owner is not punished if the slave survives a day or two. Proverbs 23 tells parents to beat children with a rod to save them. That is not divine morality. That is primitive violence with holy language wrapped around it. And this is why religion should not get special protection. When a book teaches ownership, punishment, fear, and obedience, people should not bow to it. They should challenge it. A moral society improves when we stop defending bad ideas just because they are old, sacred, or popular.
So where does that leave us? We have the situation where religious beliefs are inevitably dividing one community from another because they're incompatible. We have religious beliefs and the sheer divisions among communities leading to violence. And the most reasonable people in our societies in the West, moderates and secularists, are constrained by taboos from talking about this. We have really medieval superstitions deciding social policy in 21st century America. And what I argue in my book is that we cannot sufficiently criticize the encroach of medievalism and the spread of fundamentalism because of the lip service we pay to faith, because of the validity we accord it in our discourse. There's no one in the White House press corps who can stand up when the president says something like, we need common sense judges, I'm quoting now, we need common sense judges who realize that our rights are derived from God. And these are the kinds of judges I plan to put on the bench. Okay, no one in the White House press corps can stand up and say, Mr. President, How is that any different from needing common sense judges who understand that our rights are derived from Poseidon or Zeus? Okay, that would be the last question that journalist ever asks. And needless to say, we cannot possibly elect a president who openly doubts the existence of God, openly doubts the existence of a personal God who can hear our prayers, who takes an interest in our affairs. 70% of Americans believe that it is important to have a president who is strongly religious. Over 50% of Americans claim to find atheists highly disagreeable. Now, I think we can all agree that if anyone was dying on account of Zeus, if people were organizing their lives around different dogmas about Mount Olympus, if books were being written trying to explain and constrain science in light of the Iliad and the Odyssey, this would be an obscene misuse of human life. I mean, but it's not like someone figured out in the 3rd century that Zeus doesn't exist, but the biblical God does. That's not a discovery that anyone made. This is the situation we are in. People are dying for an imaginary God, and we are not talking about it. I mean, you can read the newspaper for a year and not be reminded that the conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians is a religious conflict. It is always framed as a conflict over land. It is only about land because the religious beliefs are incompatible. The theological claims on the real estate are incompatible. And moderates like yourselves are uniquely unable to appreciate the link between religious dogma and violence. You are blinded by your own moderation. When the jihadi looks into the video camera and says, "We love death more than the infidel loves life," and then blows himself up, the religious dogmatists on our side, the Jerry Falwells of the world, they have no problem understanding that he was being quite candid. He really did have the courage of his convictions. This was not propaganda. He went to paradise, or so he thought. It turns out he has the wrong religion. But he was after the 72 virgins. So one thing I argue in my book is that it's time we took these people at their word. They're telling us what they believe. And I don't know how many architects and mechanical engineers need to hit the wall at 400 miles an hour before we take them at their word. So what is the alternative to religious faith? Now, there are two answers to this. The first answer is it's the wrong question to ask. Either God exists or he doesn't. If he doesn't exist, then we would be better off not believing in him. And what is the alternative to a belief in Santa Claus? The answer really is nothing. Now, it's not that a belief in Santa Claus was doing nothing for a child. You know, a child is entranced and consoled and interested and happy that Santa Claus exists. You take the belief away, you've taken something away. You haven't replaced it with something. But whatever conspired to make the belief untenable, perhaps he saw that it was his parents wrapping the presents. The belief disappears, and we all know that no one wants to be the last kid in class who believes in Santa Claus. And imagine how untenable the position of a child would be if he claimed not to want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. He claimed to have found a moderate position on Santa Claus, and he could keep the sleigh and the elves, but jettison the guy in the suit. So the first answer to the question, what are the alternatives to faith? There don't have to be alternatives. If these beliefs are false, if they're untenable, we can relinquish them. As many countries in Western Europe have done. Only 10% of Swedes, 10 to 15%, are believers of the sort we recognize in the States. Incidentally, 83% of Americans believe that Jesus literally rose from the dead. Now, again, it may seem insane, it may seem counterproductive, it's throwing the baby out with the bathwater, to just say we can relinquish these beliefs without an alternative. But let me remind you about how easy it is to see the wisdom of this when we simply change the word God to Zeus. No one is feeling that maybe we should hold on to Zeus. You know, when we woke up the day after Christmas and turned on our televisions and saw that a killing wall of water had swept multitudes off the beaches of 12 countries, nobody said, you know, I think maybe we should be praying to Poseidon. You know, let's just cover our bases.
The problem is that religion still gets a free pass in public life. People can say our rights come from God, and everyone is expected to nod like that is serious. But replace God with Zeus, Poseidon, or Thor, and suddenly everyone sees how absurd it sounds. Christianity survives because it is treated as familiar, not because it has better evidence. There was no discovery that proved the biblical God is real while every other ancient God is fake. People simply inherited one story instead of another. And when that story enters politics, courts, education, and foreign policy, it becomes dangerous. A country cannot make clear decisions while millions of people believe ancient prophecy, supernatural judgment, and invisible beings should shape real-world law.
But another way of answering this question is that, yes, clearly there are alternatives to faith. You know, whatever our spiritual possibilities are, they have to transcend culture and tradition. Whatever is true ultimately transcends culture and tradition. There is a very good reason why we don't talk about Christian physics or Muslim algebra, though the Christians invented physics as we know it. As we know, the Jews brought it to the next level. But we don't talk about the cultural context in which these disciplines arose, because there really is a there. They really are legitimate domains of knowledge that transcend culture. An experiment done in Los Angeles is going to work just like an experiment done in Baghdad if, in fact, it really is teasing out some real truth about the nature of the world. Now, contemplatives in a variety of religious traditions have looked into the connection between how we use our attention and human happiness, how we behave among others, ethics and human happiness. There's a lot of wisdom in our religious traditions on these subjects, but invariably, this testimony is mingled with dogma. There's no doubt that doing the Jesus prayer for 18 hours a day is going to radically transform your moment-to-moment experience of the world, very likely for the better. A Christian doing this practice will interpret these changes, these positive changes, as a confirmation of Christian dogma, as a confirmation of the idea that Jesus really was the Son of God, for instance. Now, it seems to me that there's a cure for this kind of provincialism. You only have to read about the identical experiences of Hindus to realize that the conclusion that Jesus is the Son of God is not the best interpretation of the data, of your own experience as a Christian. So the challenge for us, as I see it, is to find ways for talking about our deepest personal concerns, about the inevitability of death, about the inevitability of human suffering, about whatever we can do to transcend suffering, deepen communities, use ritual, to talk about all of this in terms that don't demand belief in anything on insufficient evidence. Because reason and evidence are our only link to one another. A fundamental openness to evidence is the only thing that guarantees the human conversation is truly open-ended. And that said, I'd like to thank you for listening to my side of it. Thank you very much.
We do not have Christian physics, Muslim algebra, or Hindu chemistry. If something is true, it works everywhere. It survives testing, evidence, and criticism. That is exactly where Christianity falls apart. A Christian may pray for hours and feel peace, but a Hindu, Buddhist, or Muslim can have the same deep experience and explain it through a totally different belief system. That means the feeling is real, but the religious story attached to it is not proven. Human beings can have meaning, ethics, community, ritual, and spiritual depth without pretending ancient books are perfect. We do not need faith to care about suffering. We need honesty, evidence, and the courage to let bad beliefs die. So here is the question. If Christianity needs faith to survive, but science, ethics, and human compassion can stand without it, what does that tell us? Comment your thoughts below. And if you want more breakdowns like this, like and subscribe.